So I don't like my lions. I put out a poisoned carcass and they eat it and problem solved, right? You get that from rats all the way up. If you aren't using it appropriately, then in some places they actually lose a lot of their birds of carrion because they come down and they eat that poisoned carcass and then die. So that problem extends outside of California. How do you deal with it?
You wrote this paper. The title of it is A Cross-National Comparison of the Efficacy of Community-Based and National Governance Approaches on the Protection of the African Elephant.
Yeah, I need to work on my titles.
Community-based and national governance approaches. I read the summary, and in the summary it says that basically community-based governance is associated with an increase of roughly twice the number of elephants killed than a national governance approach. First of all, what is community-based governance?
It's designed to return control to local communities so that local communities have the ability to benefit from the resource and manage it in a way that's sustainable. So the idea is people's wildlife resources or forest resources or water resources or whatever become like their cows. Okay. Nobody's going to walk out and say, I feel like making some money today and wiping out their entire herd of cows, because obviously that's, yeah, you make all your money and it's a one, but you don't have cows going forward. In most places, the state owns the wildlife. Happens in the US, right? I cannot go out and just shoot myself a deer. I have to get a permit from the state to shoot a deer in sanctioned places, because that coyote that I saw in my driveway this morning, that's not my coyote. That's the government's coyote.
Interesting. Okay.
And that's just the way the law is set up. And it's set up like that here, and it's set up like that pretty much everywhere. And so there, right, if I look out and that thing has value dead, or it being there is causing me harm, either way, it is worth more to me dead than it is to me alive. Right? I don't benefit at the same point, right? So an elephant that raids my crops does me harm if it's alive. If I kill it, it's worth money. A dead elephant is worth money to me, as long as I don't get busted by the police. Your incentive structure there is not to ensure the future survival of the elephant. If you're poaching, you try to maximize your amount of gain in the shortest period of time, and you're back out because you don't want to get caught. There's this idea that you can set up your incentive structures so that now I can earn money from that elephant alive because people want to come take pictures of it, or I can grab a baby every now and then and sell it to a zoo, or whatever the circumstance is, right? Or I can hunt it, or I can sell a hunting permit to somebody else. If I can do that, then I have the incentive to ensure a continuing supply of that resource, right? It's my cow. I will occasionally kill my cow. I might sell a cow, but I'm going to make sure that I don't do it at a level that's going to wipe me out going forward. So that's the idea behind community-based governance, is you set it up legally, right? You set up this incentive structure so that it's not done at the national level, it's done at the local level. And part of this is the assumption that the smaller your group is, the less problems you're going to have in getting everybody to do the right thing, right? Neighbors know what neighbors are doing. I may not know what somebody on the other side of the country is doing, but I might know what somebody next door to me is doing. And so you get self-policing. And I'll say it works very well in some places and it works terribly in some places. And you could say that about any form of governance. Regarding this finding, I ended up waving my hands around at the end and saying, it's hard to know how much to make of this. And there's a couple of reasons why.
Can you summarize your finding?
Yes, sure. So what I found is, interestingly enough, well, first I got to break up how I did it a little bit. So I went in and I did a bunch of mapping, and I laid out where, so there's
the carcass mapping. Right?
Yeah. So there's the Convention on International Trade of Endangered Species. That's an international treaty. And one of the programs they do is they monitor elephant deaths. They have areas where they use whatever techniques they use, and they say, okay, we've observed this many new dead elephants in this year. And then they simply say, how many of those are the result of illegal kills? So sometimes you have too many elephants and you have to kill them off, and sometimes there's legal hunting, and elephants do die of old age and predators and whatever. But they're also poached. And so what they do is they come up with a ratio. So they might say we had 100 dead elephants and 50 of them were illegal and the other 50 don't appear to be that. I took that for a bunch of countries. There's some map resources out there, and I was able to plot out what areas fit under what form of governance. I overlapped that with these monitoring areas, and I looked at the percentage of governance in each and tried to figure out what sort of illegal kill proportion we saw. What I found was that an increase in either form of governance corresponded with an increase in illegal kill, although the increase was higher for community-based areas.
But how can an increase in any form of governance lead to an increase in kills?
Right.
What does that mean?
That seems paradoxical, right?
Yeah.
It's possible that there were forms of governance that didn't show up under either formal approach, right? So either the formalized community-based or the government ones. I think that's probably unlikely. There was one or two monitoring sites that didn't really have any formal governance regimes there. There wasn't a national park or a wildlife refuge, and it wasn't a formal community-based thing. And they just...
So there was no, it was kind of like
it would have just
lawless...
been like around you, right? If you're not living in the
Yeah.
middle of a park, it's probably some very rural area with people living there. But there are a couple of them that just reported very few illegal kills. Out of the observed deaths, the proportion was very low. And so that could have skewed things a little bit. So I wasn't so concerned about the fact that both were associated. What was a little interesting is that the community-based approach was associated with a greater increase, although for most of that, there was... So nothing's certain, right? So when you talk about what's known as a confidence interval, and you're saying, look, we think if we reran this thing 90 times, 100 times, 90 times out of 100, we get something that sort of reflects reality, right? It's the fact that there's a margin of error. And so for a lot of it, the margin of error is overlapped. So there may have been a difference. There may not have been a difference. It would suggest that there is, and there's maybe some reasons for that. National parks and stuff like that have been around for 150 plus years. Community-based governance really only started kicking off in the early 90s. So it's possible that we're still working out the kinks.
You're talking about in Africa.
Well, yeah, I'd say it's less utilized. Community-based is much less utilized in the US, for example. But this idea of let's move it down to the communities, that approach to wildlife governance really came about in the 1990s.
One of the things that strikes me as a common theme in all of these human-wildlife conflict topics is the importance of money.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's concerned about money.
I think that's the case for a lot of things.
I think you're right.
But so let me just finish up. The last reason, some of it may have just been the animal I was looking at. Community-based approaches are the idea that it's the community members that are doing the killing. I'm going to be killing that elephant for its ivory, and I'm going to poach that. Ivory is a big enough thing that there have been some reports that you actually have people coming from urban areas out. They basically have poaching cells where people come out. And so the one thing that it may be that communities aren't geared for with something like an elephant is keeping people out. These communities don't have rangers with guns and everything patrolling. And so that may be one of the reasons why. It may work very well for something that's not so commercially valuable that outsiders are coming in to do it.
I think a lot of it is still wilderness, correct?
So it's wilderness, but maybe not as we think of it. So I think a lot of people here have an idea of wilderness as being the absolute absence of people. And that's not Africa. It's very rural and very low population density in most places. But outside of the national parks, you have people living where the wildlife is, right? You have low population density, but people are out grazing their cattle, and you have livestock roaming in the same place that you have Cape buffalo and lion and cheetah, and there's an uneasy tension there. But that's where the vast majority of the wildlife is. It's where people are. But
what was your...
It's not like the communities here, right? Where you don't drive along and it's not house. Sorry.
What was your experience like in Namibia, you said? You were there and that's where you did your PhD work?
Yeah. So I've been there a few times. When I was in law school, I went out and I spent a summer as a legal intern for the biggest nonprofit law firm there. It was a human rights law firm. They did environmental issues and they did gender equality issues. So I was on their environmental side. And then that planted the seed in my head. And so when I ended up going back to get a PhD, I already had some connections there. And so, yeah, I did my field work up in the northwest part of Namibia in what they call conservancies. And either conservancies are sort of formal jurisdictions. It's sort of like a school district. So it's not like its own county. It's a jurisdiction created for wildlife, community-based wildlife governance, basically. So the idea that's set up, and some of these are big areas, right? 1,000 plus square kilometers, and you might have 700 or 800 people living in it. But they're the community. It's not a community the way we tend to think of it. Like, here's a village but it's set up like that. And that's the formal area. So I did my field work in 4 of those.
Yeah, I imagine it was probably just stunningly beautiful.
Yeah. Some of the scenery is it's very dry. It's very deserty, but yeah, if you don't mind sand dunes and some dead trees sticking up. I was there at they have to deal with crushing droughts there. I'm talking like multi-year. It's the only place I've ever been where I was in the shade and the wind blew and I got hotter because it blew in the air off the sand that had been baking. And you're like, gosh, if it wasn't for this breeze, I'd be so much. Yeah. But, and that actually, it's funny because that exacerbates human wildlife conflict. A drought like that wipes out the food supply for the herbivores. They start dying off and the predators come to where the food is. And that's people's goats and people's sheep and whatever. And that's just going to get worse with climate change. As you get bigger droughts, longer droughts, things congregate around water holes and predators come to where the food is because they're not going to starve to death. Like, oh, well, there's no springbok left. I guess I'll just sit here and die. It's, oh, look, a goat. It's interesting. The hardcore climate skepticism. I'm not saying it doesn't exist elsewhere, but it really only is not fringy in the US. If you go to places in Africa, if you go to other places, they're not denying it. It tends to be much more of a, how are we going to deal with it kind of issue. It's really in the US where that's taken root.